911, what's your emergency? The line was silent for a beat. Then came a voice, calm, detached, eerily unshaken. I killed her. She's in the living room. Please send someone. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't hysteria. It was cold confession. James Connolly, a man with no prior record, no history of violence, had just admitted to killing his wife. And he wasn't running. He was waiting. Dispatchers kept him talking. The tone never shifted. His words were surgical, his pauses intentional. No, I'm not armed. I'm not going anywhere. I'm sorry someone has to see this. This wasn't how crimes were supposed to be reported. This wasn't normal. But as officers approached the Connolly residence, they realized nothing about this night would be. James and Vanessa Connolly lived in a quiet Ohio suburb, the kind of neighborhood where lawns were trimmed on Sundays and neighbors waved with coffee in hand. James worked as a high school counselor. Calm, introverted, and always helpful, he was the kind of man who stayed late to talk with struggling students. Vanessa was a pediatric nurse. Warm, organized, and community-focused, she volunteered at health fairs and ran fundraisers for the local children's hospital. They hosted dinners, attended PTA meetings, visited church every Sunday. To the outside world, they were perfect. But to those who looked closely, especially Vanessa's close friends, there were fractures beneath the polished surface. Vanessa once joked, "James is my rock. He never yells, never gets mad. He just watches." But as time passed, the joke faded. Her texts to friends became infrequent. She stopped attending girls' nights. She canceled coffee meetups last minute. Her sister, Emily, said Vanessa began sounding like someone walking on glass. In one of her last journal entries, Vanessa wrote, "He makes me feel like I've lost my mind. Like I misremember things. Like I'm the problem. Coercive control. Gaslighting. Emotional surveillance." Vanessa was in a relationship that wasn't physically abusive, but left deep bruises on her sense of self. She was planning to leave. Her lease was signed. Her car packed. She told a friend, "This is the last week I'll live in that house." She didn't survive the week. It was Friday, July 9th. Vanessa returned from work just after 6:30 p.m. James had prepared her favorite meal, eggplant parmesan. They ate, watched a movie, and sat quietly. Around 10:45 p.m., Vanessa stood to head upstairs. James followed, but instead of joining her, he stepped into the kitchen. He retrieved a belt, the one he had stashed earlier behind the couch. In his statement, James said, "I knew she was leaving. I couldn't take it. I couldn't let it happen." He waited until she sat on the couch to fold laundry. He walked up behind her. In one swift motion, he wrapped the belt around her neck. She didn't scream. The autopsy later confirmed she died in less than 40 seconds. At 11:12 p.m., James picked up the phone and dialed 911. The full transcript of the call would later be released. "Dispatcher, 911, what's your emergency?" "James, I killed my wife. She's in the living room. I need someone to come." "Dispatcher, sir, what?" "James, I strangled her. She's gone. I just couldn't let her go." He remained on the phone for nearly 15 minutes, detailing exactly what he did, how long it took, and where police could find him. He described Vanessa's body with the detached tone of someone describing a traffic accident. He ended the call with, "Please be gentle when you move her. She hated rough hands." When officers arrived, they found James seated on the couch, hands in his lap. Vanessa's body was covered with a light blanket, a pillow beneath her head. James had arranged her as if she was sleeping. The officers who responded that night, Officer Ramirez and Sergeant Nolan, later required psychological counseling. There was no chaos, Ramirez later said. No blood. No fight. Just stillness. That was worse. They found no alcohol, no drugs, no signs of forced entry or struggle. Only control. At the station, James waived his right to an attorney. He told detectives, "I want to talk. I don't want to hide." Over a 7-hour interview, he confessed to everything, with exact detail. He described his obsession with Vanessa's routine. He monitored her texts, planted a tracker on her car, kept copies of her apartment application. "I knew where she was going. I knew what she was packing. She thought she had secrets. She didn't." He researched strangulation techniques, learned about the carotid artery, practiced grip strength. "I didn't want her to suffer. I just didn't want her to leave." Friends and family spoke at her vigil. They described Vanessa as someone who carried light in her hands. She wrote poems on napkins, left kindness notes in public restrooms. One friend said, "She wasn't just beautiful. She made people believe in good things." Her co-workers said she had a sixth sense with children. She could calm a screaming toddler in seconds. Vanessa's sister, Emily, said in her eulogy, she wanted to live a loud life, but he made her whisper. There was no trial. James pled guilty. At sentencing, he stood silently as prosecutors read his confession aloud. Vanessa's mother wept uncontrollably in the front row. The judge said, "There is no redemption in this story, only permanence. You robbed a woman of her future and called it love." James was sentenced to life without parole. Dr. Selena Roth, a criminal psychologist, testified about James's mindset. He believed if he confessed, he controlled the ending. His motive wasn't passion. It was possession. This type of killer doesn't run. They plan. They confess. Because to them, the confession is the final act of power. James wanted to write the ending. The 911 call was leaked. It went viral. Some online users described James as mentally ill. Others labeled him a monster. Activists called out the lack of early intervention. Why didn't anyone see this coming? Podcasts analyzed every line of the call. A hashtag, #JusticeForVanessa, trended worldwide. Vanessa's family created the Vanessa Moore Foundation, advocating for emotional abuse awareness. Their slogan, "You don't need bruises to be broken." They now work with lawmakers to expand legal definitions of domestic abuse. Months into his sentence, James wrote a 12-page letter to a journalist. He said, "I loved her more than life. But love isn't always clean." The letter made headlines. But critics said it wasn't remorse, it was ego. Vanessa's journal was published posthumously. Titled Before Friday, it became a bestseller. Her words empowered others to speak up. Survivors reached out from across the country. James believed he could control how Vanessa lived. When he lost control, he took her life. Then, he tried to control the narrative. But in the end, Vanessa's voice was louder. If this story disturbed you, you're not alone. We tell these stories not to glorify killers, but to remember the victims, and to understand the dark complexities of the human mind. White right pointing backhand index. If you or someone you know is in an abusive or controlling relationship, please reach out. You can contact domestic violence hotlines in your area. Your voice could save a life. Bell subscribe to True Crime Hub for more real, chilling, and emotionally gripping stories every week. Despite the shocking confession, the defense mounted a bold appeal strategy. They claimed psychological instability, coercion, and mental delusion. The prosecution countered with an avalanche of evidence: photos, text messages, recorded phone calls. But the heart of the matter was still the 911 call, played again for the jury. The courtroom fell silent as the chilling voice filled the space. Even the judge leaned back, visibly shaken. Vanessa's sister took the stand again. Her testimony was gut-wrenching, describing the nightmare of watching justice dangle by a thread. The jury deliberated for days. The media swirled with commentary. Was he truly remorseful, or just a master manipulator? A guilty. The word echoed. The courtroom exhaled. The killer sat stone-faced. Life in prison, without the possibility of parole. There was no cheering, no satisfaction. Only silence. The weight of what was lost could never be lifted. Vanessa's mother sobbed, not out of joy, but from exhaustion. She had aged a decade in those few years. The judge acknowledged the family's pain in her closing statement. Justice doesn't restore the lost, but it can honor the truth. In prison, the killer became known as the caller. He was housed in isolation for his own safety. Inmates whispered stories about him, as if he were a ghost. He wrote long letters, allegedly to Vanessa's spirit. The letters were intercepted, some published by the press. They revealed a man tormented not by guilt, but by obsession. His remorse was self-centered. "I loved you so much I had to keep you," one line read. Readers recoiled. Vanessa's family tried to rebuild. Her sister started a podcast to give voice to women in abusive relationships. Her father couldn't return to work. Her mother began counseling other grieving parents. Photos of Vanessa began to appear at domestic violence rallies. Her story became a symbol, not just of tragedy, but of overlooked warning signs. Her final diary entry became a quote used in campaigns. "If love feels like fear, it isn't love." A true crime filmmaker contacted the family. After long deliberation, they agreed. The documentary, The Killer Who Called, aired on major streaming platforms and reignited public outrage. The 911 call was featured, as was Vanessa's journal, dramatized by an actress. Millions watched. Viewers cried. Debates flared on forums. Why didn't anyone help sooner? How did love turn into this? Was the confession an act of guilt or control? Disturbingly, copycat incidents arose. Men in toxic relationships began using 911 calls to confess, trying to control the narrative like the original killer. The media coined the term confession narcissism. Lawmakers began pushing for psychological evaluation protocols during domestic calls. One chilling case involved a man who killed his partner and called the cops mid-crime. "I'm doing what he did," he said. The ripple effect had become dangerous. Vanessa's sister was invited to speak at a national women's conference. Her speech was raw and powerful. You hear about the victims after they are gone. But what about the moments before? What about the silence between screams? My sister died in that silence, and I refused to let anyone else fall into it. She received a standing ovation. New laws began forming, mandatory check-ins during known abusive cases, psychological risk assessments. Vanessa's name was mentioned in legislation. Months after the survivor's speech, a senator proposed Vanessa's law. It would require law enforcement to flag recurring domestic violence reports and initiate wellness checks for at-risk individuals, even if they hadn't filed charges. Opposition arose, citing privacy concerns. But the stories, the statistics, and Vanessa's 911 call haunted the halls of power. Survivors testified. Advocates fought. Eventually, it passed in multiple states. Vanessa's name would be spoken in courtrooms, not as a victim, but as a catalyst for change. From prison, the killer filed a last-ditch appeal. He claimed mental illness and ineffective counsel. His lawyers leaned on his journal entries, citing hallucinations and delusions. The court reviewed it but found nothing new, only obsession, control, and cold clarity. His appeal was denied. Again, and again. He stopped writing letters after that. The city where it all happened held a candlelight vigil on the anniversary of Vanessa's death. Thousands attended, many who had never known her. They lit candles, played a recording of her favorite song, and stood in silence as her sister read a letter she'd never gotten to send. It ended with 5 words that echoed in every heart. You didn't die in vain. 1 year later, a friend of Vanessa found a journal she had given her in confidence, hidden in a closet. It contained her fears, hopes, and warnings she had seen in her partner long before the 911 call. One passage stood out. I know if I stay, I might not get another tomorrow. But if I go, will anyone believe me? It would later be published as part of a book titled Her Tomorrow. Detective Ramirez, who initially worked on the case, broke down in an interview. He admitted to missing signs during routine calls made by Vanessa in the months before her death. She never outright said help me, and I didn't dig deeper. That haunts me. He now trains officers on identifying subtle signs of coercive control and psychological abuse. Universities across the country started using Vanessa's story in criminal justice and psychology programs. Students analyzed the 911 call. They reviewed behavioral patterns. Professors asked, "What would you have done if this was your friend? Your sister?" The goal wasn't just to teach, it was to change. An old boyfriend of Vanessa spoke out. He recalled moments where she had hinted at her fear but brushed it off. "I thought she was being dramatic," he confessed. He now volunteers at a shelter for abused women, his voice trembling in interviews. "I could have done more. I didn't. That's on me." Vanessa's mother released a letter publicly. "I still set your plate at dinner sometimes. I still hear your laugh in the walls. I want the world to know you were not just a victim. You are my baby. You were bright and bold. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you are not forgotten." The letter went viral, shared by celebrities and activists. The 911 dispatcher who answered Vanessa's call suffered deeply. She was placed on leave for PTSD. She admitted in an interview, "I replay her voice every night. I keep wondering, could I have gotten there sooner?" She later helped develop a training program for dispatchers on handling active domestic threats and emotional distress cues. Street artists across the nation began painting Vanessa's face on murals, often with phrases like "believe her" or "one call, too late." Some included the 911 timestamp. The movement grew. Cities funded mural projects in partnership with domestic violence awareness groups. Vanessa had become a symbol of silent suffering, and the demand to never let it happen again. Vanessa's father had rarely spoken. At a town hall, he finally did. I was raised not to cry, not to meddle, but my silence helped kill her. If your daughter says she's afraid, believe her. The room fell silent. His voice didn't shake, but his pain filled every corner of that auditorium. Inspired by Vanessa's story, a new system was piloted, Code V. Victims could now text or use subtle code words during 911 calls that would alert authorities to respond discreetly and with urgency. The system prevented 3 domestic murders in its first year alone. It became a national model. Vanessa's sister launched a podcast called The Silence Between Screams. Each episode focused on a different victim of domestic violence whose early warning signs were ignored. It gained a massive following. Celebrities joined as guests. Survivors sent messages. One fan wrote, "I left him because of your podcast. You saved me." A journalist interviewed the killer behind bars. When asked about Vanessa, he smiled faintly. "She said she loved me. That meant she was mine." The public reacted with fury. The interview was removed from platforms after backlash. But the damage was done. He was a monster in the public eye once again. Years later, Vanessa's sister found love again. But the trauma lingered. She spoke of being terrified to trust. She still checked door locks obsessively. She wrote, "Every I love you from him comes with a shadow. A voice that says, what if?" Healing was slow, but it was happening. In several school districts, Vanessa's case became part of the health curriculum. Teens were taught red flags in relationships, how to seek help, and how to recognize emotional manipulation. Teachers reported noticeable changes. Students began reporting troubling relationships, ones they wouldn't have spoken about before. That 911 call was now used in law enforcement academies across the country, not for horror, but for empathy training. Instructors asked cadets, "What would you have done? Could you hear what she wasn't saying?" It changed the way officers approached domestic calls, forever. Congress passed a resolution to mark October 18th as Vanessa Martinez Awareness Day, focusing on emotional abuse and silent suffering. Each year, her story is told across platforms. Candles are lit. Bells ring at 9:11 p.m. The National Domestic Violence Hotline reported a 23% increase in calls following the documentary and awareness campaign. Thousands of lives were touched. Some were saved. And each call, in a way, was a whisper from Vanessa reaching someone just in time. Vanessa's trial led to major judicial reforms. Judges and prosecutors began undergoing trauma-informed training. No longer were victims judged for why they stayed. The question became, why didn't we protect them sooner? In prison, the killer began to fade, mentally and physically. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia and placed on permanent watch. His final recorded words, scribbled in a journal, "She's still in the walls." He was moved to a psychiatric facility. No one visited. A social media campaign launched. Hashif loved her. Survivors posted photos with signs describing how their abusers claimed to love them. It flooded timelines. One said, "He said he loved me, then he broke my ribs." Vanessa's face was at the center of it all. A major studio optioned Vanessa's story for a feature film. The family approved, with strict terms, no romanticizing, no sensationalism, only truth. An Oscar-nominated actress signed on. The film was called The Call. Vanessa's law inspired similar bills in Canada, Australia, and the UK. Her story crossed oceans. She had become a global voice against intimate partner violence. One day, Vanessa's sister received a handwritten note. "I left after hearing her call. I slept with my shoes on for weeks. I live now because of her." That letter was framed in her home. Vanessa's old bedroom was kept exactly as she left it. Her journals, her guitar, her perfume. Every year on her birthday, her family placed fresh roses on the bed. You were here. You mattered. You still do. Vanessa's story didn't end with her death. It echoed, through reform, through education, through lives saved. Her 911 call was once a symbol of horror. Now, it's a warning, a lesson, a call to action. There is no true closure for a life taken too soon. But there is movement, change, legacy. Vanessa's name will forever mean more than how she died. It will mean what she stood for. Justice doesn't restore the lost, but it can honor the truth.